Good morning, everyone. It's Mimi Ito here, Research Director at the Digital Media and Learning Hub at UC Irvine. I am getting a bit of feedback. I don't know if other people are getting that. Let me see if I give me one sec to see if it's the live stream here. Okay, I think I'm gonna not listen to my voice and do the introduction. Um, yeah, so welcome to the fifth in our webinar series for connected learning. I'm very pleased this morning that Howard Rheingold, who has been moderating our Connected Learning.tv series so far, is actually our featured speaker and participant. We are streaming live on live stream as well as joined by a group of people on Google Hangout. And we will be having a highly interactive session with Howard presenting a bit of his work on pedagogy up front, and then having a discussion that's actually modeling some of the principles of pedagogy and peer-based learning that Howard has been developing. So I think I want to encourage people who are on the live stream to participate in the chat channel to have discussion, but also to post questions on the chat channel that I will try to moderate and bring into the Google Hangout. I wanted to start by inviting our participants in the Hangout to introduce themselves so we can all be familiar with who's in our fishbowl here, and then I'll turn it over to Howard. So maybe Bronwyn, would you like to start? Just give a brief introduction.
Sure, thanks Mimi. I'm Bronwyn Stuckey in Sydney, Australia, and I work as an educational technologist in communities of practice and virtual worlds and online games for children and for the professional development of teachers. So that's me.
Thanks, Bronwyn. John, do you want to jump in?
This is John Smith. I'm in Portland, Oregon. Worked in higher education as an institutional researcher for a long time, and now work with Bronwyn and Etienne Wenger and Nancy White and others, is a consultant and as the community steward at CP Square. So this whole topic of kind of how peerages form and negotiate learning has been a long time interest. Really happy to be here.
Thanks so much, John. George, would you like to jump in?
Hey, I'm George Kroos. I'm Division Principal of Innovative Teaching and Learning in Parkland School Division, which is located in Stony Plain, Alberta. And we do a lot of work with social media, connecting our schools, our students to each other, to the wider, the entire world. So I'm really looking forward to learning with everyone today.
Great, thanks, George. Sylvia?
Hi, I'm Sylvia Martinez. I'm the president of Generation Yes, a nonprofit in the United States. And we work with schools in the US and all around the world to empower students to share their knowledge with their teachers and their peers, especially in the areas of digital technology, so that schools can use those technologies more effectively.
Thanks, Sylvia. And John Baroloni? Cool, thanks, John. So now I'm going to turn it over to Howard to frame up our session for us.
Okay, I'm just going to talk for about 10 minutes here, and then the rest of it will be a conversation among the rest of us. I'm going to turn screen sharing on here just so I can show you a few slides. So you should be able to see my slide at this point. I'm not seeing you, so let me know if you're not seeing it or if it's not updating. I want to start by emphasizing that I'm going to talk about my use of technology and how it has enabled and supported this kind of self-organized peer learning that we're calling pedagogy. But I want to emphasize that this is really about what I and those who have learned with me have learned about teaching and learning through the technology. I really go back to Doug Engelbart when he first invented all of the tools that we're using now. Originally in 1962, in his paper on augmenting human intellect, talked about humans using language, artifacts, methodology, and training. And of course, the artifacts, due to Moore's law and other factors, have evolved multi-billion fold, but our language, methodology, and training around learning has not changed so much, although it certainly doesn't mean that it's been static. I've been interested in the idea of using online media for peer learning for a long time. I originally wrote this article about virtual communities for the Whole Earth Review in 1987. And in that article, a lot of my excitement was the ability for people to share knowledge, to find out things on our own that we could share with others. And at that same time, as I was editor of Whole Earth Review, we were publishing Ivan Illich, whose Deschooling Society was influential on me. In 1995, I helped put together this mock-up for a demonstration of a University of the Future for the NEC Corporation. So if you remember 1995, Netscape had just gone public. The modem was about 22.5. That's 22,000 bits per second, and it took quite a while for a simple graphic to load. So this was what I saw as what we might be able to do someday, and NEC spent quite a bit of money creating a demo of it. So 8 years ago, I started teaching at UC Berkeley and at Stanford about social media issues, and it only made sense to use social media to do our discussing about the issues that were raised by these media. So I used a wiki from Social Text and a forum from another vendor and blogs from Drupal. And one of the things I learned from my students was that this was a little confusing to them. They had separate user interfaces and separate logins. I didn't know a great deal about teaching when I started, but I was attracted to the idea of collaborative inquiry, and I really tried to model that with my students by asking them what was going on with them. So in response to their feedback about what we were doing, I entered the haystack competition. So I won one of the first awards, which enabled me to pay a developer to develop the social media classroom, which puts together forums, blogs, wikis, and other media under a uniform user interface in a browser, and it's free and open source and available to others. I learned very quickly that in trying to get other people to adopt it, that I had to really show what it was that I was doing. So whenever I developed a kind of lesson plan for my students on how to use forums or blogs or wikis or social bookmark in the context of our learning, I put up these lesson plans for others there. So I just very, very briefly want to talk about the context of using those social media. We use the forums as the voice of the group. So we meet once a week for 3 hours, and we do a lot of different activities in those 3 hours. And one of the things that we do is identify those conversations that we don't want to stop, because usually once you get something really interesting going in a classroom, eventually the bell rings and you've got to move on. With forums, you're able to continue those conversations throughout the quarter. So I really introduced forums as a conversation among the community in which it's incumbent upon each person who's posting to not just post a stellar little riff, but to respond and build on and correspond with what the other people have been posting as well. So it's about the voice of the group, about issues that we want to discuss as a group. And we use the blogs as the kind of individual voice for reflection. Most students are used to writing papers that the teacher sees. They're not really used to writing for their peers. And here we have the ability to not only reflect individually, choose our own reflections about the subject, but to get peer responses to that. And the comment threads there are often quite lively. So the difference between the forum discussions and the blog discussions is that in the forums, it's what we decide as a group that we want to discuss. And in the blogs, it's what the individual decides that he or she want to reflect on. We also use the wiki, and in particular, we use wiki work as part of co-learning and co-teaching, which I'll talk about in just a second. So this is one of the first classrooms I faced. It was before we started experimenting with the important technology in the classroom, which are the desks. So you can see the change when we started moving the desks into a circle. Also, there's not a teacher standing in front of the classroom talking to the students who may or may not be paying attention to me. These are the students helping with the teaching. So one of the things that emerged from my collaborative inquiry with students was that the more power I gave them, my teacher power, and the more responsibility I gave them for being responsible for their learning and for teaching each other, the more engaged in what we were doing they became. So the co-teaching groups don't teach everything. They teach part of the session. They meet with me, they come up with a plan, and the idea is to come up with some engaging activities around what they feel are the important issues that week. And they have some other duties as well. I'm not going to really detail that, but one of the things that I ask the co-teaching groups to do is to make a mind map. One of the things that we do is the lexicon. So the co-teaching group identifies words and phrases from the texts, from the classroom discussions, that they would like to take away from the class when the course is over. And they put those on the wiki. And then it's up to everybody else in the class during the week between that class session and the next class session to fill out the lexicon, a little bit Wikipedia style. And I intervene very lightly by saying this is a stub, it needs to be filled out, or this definition is not quite correct. But for the most part, it's up to them. And it's also a collective action problem. They're not used to having multiple author documents. So I do show them the revision history at the beginning of the class, so everybody knows who worked on it, and the most diligent fill out their revisions with a little note on why they made a revision. So it's a little bit of a lesson in collective action as well as in wiki collaboration. I also ask them to make a mind map of the territory we covered the week before. We move so quickly in a survey course from subject to subject that it's important, I think, to link back to what we talked about last week and the week before. And I like the mind maps because it moves us into the kind of lateral, horizontal, two-dimensional realm instead of the kind of hierarchical outline format, and also enables people to think visually and to make connections between things. This is actually a concept map. So I just don't want to dwell on it, but I just wanted to briefly flash a couple of these mind maps on the screen to show you that the students do begin to look at a sense of the system that we're talking about and the connections between parts of the system, and begin to use a little of that right brain visual thinking. This student actually used Photoshop to make something a little fancier. So then the next step was about a year ago, last January, I started something called Rheingold U that is totally online and totally self-selected. I asked people to read the syllabus and to commit themselves to participating, and they do pay me for it. So this is a self-selected group. The first course was on Introduction to Mind Amplifiers. So We do use the social media classroom to have the asynchronous wiki forums, blogs, to post our mind maps, and to do social bookmarks. We also use a synchronous live session meetings. We use Blackboard Collaborate that enables me to stream audio and video, and for students for co-learners to participate as well with audio and video. And there's a text chat and a whiteboard, and I can do screen sharing on that as well. One of the important milestones leading to this idea of pedagogy was that when I email my students at university, I always greet them as esteemed students. And for some reason, it got into my head the first time I emailed the learners in Rheingold U, I greeted them as esteemed co-learners. And very quickly learned that that's a very powerful piece of word magic, that people are ready for that, or at least the people who are self-selecting for this kind of course. So I've done 7 or 8 versions of courses on Rheingold U and have learned from each one, but the strongest learning was that people take this co-learning very seriously. So when we do the live sessions, I put up on the whiteboard a set of roles and also invite people to invent their own roles. So while we are doing a live session like this one, we've also got a lot of action going on with people using search and finding relevant links and putting them into the text chat, and other people contextualizing that the way a blogger does, picking out a snippet from the selected resource and maybe giving a 1 or 2 line summary of it. Then the summarizers taking notes on the whole session and taking the URLs that the searchers find and the contextualizers add context to and adding that to a summary. The curators moving some of those to Digo and Delicious. And then we've got a lexicon team. And the mind map team are people who keep in mind what are the top level categories. Then we do something with the whiteboard that's kind of a magical spell for particularly the first time, in that I ask people to use the whiteboard tools to make a mind map, to just try to put up on the whiteboard what are the top level categories we've been talking about, and put circles or squares around them, and then what are the second level categories, and put circles or squares around them, and then make connections between them and upload graphics if those are appropriate. But what the magic is that you can't really see who is doing what. Words appear, they get formatted, they get moved around, circles get put on things, and lines get drawn between things, and it gets rearranged. And it's just kind of an indicator that we can do things together, even though we're a group from all over the world and we've never done anything together before. Here we are 5 minutes into our first session, and we're doing this. And then again, it's a learning process. We learned that some of the learners like to take those kind of rough mind maps and then use a mind mapping tool to distill it. So one of the emergent processes from this co-learning has been that we take material, whether it's something that I lecture on or one of the co-learners presents to us, and we try to refine it and look at it in a number of different ways and think of it as a kind of refining and distilling process. And of course, when I started looking around to see what other kind of peer learning was going on, there's just a huge amount of things happening. For the most part, these are platforms for people to learn with a teacher of some kind. So I asked what's the next step with all of these communication media, all of this information available. What do motivated self-learners need to know about the process that I've been experimenting with in order to effectively teach and learn from each other? And I was encouraged by seeing this on Kickstarter, somebody raising money for a book called Don't Go Back to School, a handbook for learning anything. I think, if you know me, I try to think a few years ahead, and I think that this may not be where the entire world is going, but this is where a certain number of people who are excited by the opportunities that we find online are going. So I was invited to do what's called the Regents Lecture at UC Berkeley, and I told about at greater length what I've discussed so far today, and I proposed an experiment in pedagogy. I met face-to-face twice with a group of students and graduate students and faculty at UC Berkeley, and I put out the call on social media. We've got a group of about 40 people. It's about 2 months old. We're down to about 20 regulars, about 10 core contributors, and another 10 who contribute when they can. So we've got a wiki, and I'll put, after I'm done with screen sharing, I'll put the URL for this into the chat here. And so the wiki is developed pretty well. We've got an outline for the book. You can see that the colored annotations there show which are stubs, which are being edited by the editing team, and which ones have been moved to WordPress for eventual publication. And you see the names next to some of the categories there. Those are the people who have signed up to collaborate on creating content for a particular category. So again, we're only 2 months old. I'm inviting people to join the project. I'll give you a URL in a minute. We also use the forums, and the forums are quite active for the teams. So teams are 2 or 3 or 4 people who are working on different areas. We're very big on self-election. Nobody is assigning anything. You sign up to do something, and we've got a workflow. And this is the visualization team showing us their idea for having little videos at the top of each article. So we actually have a WordPress version. We're beginning to move edited content over there, ready for publication. It's behind a password now, but in a couple of weeks, I think we'll have enough material to show it to the world, although I think it's far from being a finished draft, and inviting people to participate and help us fill in everything you need to know when you are developing peer-based self-learning. And I've learned a great deal from this process. For one thing, I had the idea in mind that this would be about how could a group of people who want to learn a topic go out and find texts, find resources, how do they qualify those resources, sequence them, come up with learning activities and assessment. Of course, what we're talking about here is really a syllabus, a course. Other self-learners in the pedagogy group pointed out that there's a lot of peer learning happens not in structured courses, but in environments like hackerspaces, places where you can find beginners and mentors just messing around with stuff and learning that way. So we expanded our table of contents to include learning spaces as well as courses. So this is a living document, a growing document. We are licensing it with the most liberal license, virtually a public domain license, so that anybody can use this and adapt this, and we're hoping it becomes something that people will add to in the future. So that's the URL there to find out more about it. And if you want to join the project, which means getting put on the mailing list and being registered for the social media classroom so that you can participate in that, that's where you do it. So that's my really fast run through of what we've been up to, and I open the floor to others.
Great, thanks so much, Howard, for that tour and through your journey to pedagogy. I think we do have some questions coming up in the live stream, but I wanted to invite the folks on our Hangout to raise any questions or make any comments, maybe about what connections you see to the experiments that Howard has been describing for us and some of the work that you're engaged in. It would be great to hear from folks.
So I'll start out with a question, and has to do with the to what extent, Howard, you see people finding and locating and bringing in knowledge, and to what extent are they creating and developing new knowledge?
Well, you know, I'm very much of a a magpie, so I take my theory where I can find it, and I'm really interested in the connectivism ideas that George Siemens and others have talked about, and participated in the MOOC. And if you participated in a MOOC, you know it can be pretty chaotic, and a lot of the live session that I'm talking about appears chaotic. There's a very lively chat going on. I'm pushing slides and doing a lecture. People are interrupting and getting the microphone in the video. We switched to the whiteboard to do things. And one of the things I learned from George was embrace the chaos. The idea is to not try to assimilate everything and find a niche for it in your mind. The idea is to reach out to others and make sense of it together, which is part of what that mind mapping stuff was about. So when I say co-learning, part of it is I present material, I present the texts, I do little lectures, and it's up to people to begin making sense of that together in the forums, in the mind maps, in the text chat, to ask me questions, ask them each other questions, but also I encourage everybody to do the readings well in advance so that when we get into it, we have an idea of what the core is, and people bring in what they have found. So the course lasts about 5 weeks, but the amount of material that people have found for each other that's relevant to the subject under discussion. I do a course on Introduction to Mind Amplifiers, another one on Introduction to Cooperation Theory. There's much more than we can cover in 5 weeks that I've got available, but other people bring things in as well. So we leave the forums and wikis and blogs open indefinitely after the course is over for people to go assimilate that material. So one of the ways that this idea of peer learning emerged was the tremendous amount of material and sense making that came from the co-learners. And again, by telling them that I'm experimenting and open to what you want to do, that the way we learn develops. So people said that they wanted assignments and something to, some kind of regular homework to do that they could use to punctuate each week. And so I call them missions. And of course, there's nothing here is compelled. People pay for it, but they don't get a grade or anything. And the missions came from the students. They became really exciting ideas. One of the missions, for example, is this week we're talking about subject X. We're reading about subject X. I want you to post in the forum, everybody post publicly, a question about this subject that you would like to see the other co-learners write a little mini essay on, an extended post. And then I would go through all those posts that are visible to everyone, and I would choose one and then ask the co-learners to email me their answers. And then I would post them all at one time. And it's just astonishing. It's a little mini course in itself, finding out what people go out and find out about a question that others pose. So the more I do it, the more I see the potential of, once people kind of get the hang of it, of having a structure, but maybe a loose structure, and enabling the learners to build that structure as we go along, to make the connections and make the meaning. So back to answering your question, I think that I don't know whether it's construction of knowledge, but construction of meaning. How do all of these different texts and conversations and issues and debates we're having, how do they connect? What do they mean? Let's talk about that.
I'd, if possible, like to pick up on that embrace the chaos theme. And I work in a project with children in a game, and we made a conscious decision at the beginning of that in our Massively Minecraft project to not have a curriculum, to open it up to see what curriculum the children devised as they were given free rein in the space. And so they're working in a space with trusted adults in the space, lots of adults, parents. We embrace a lot of educators in the space, but they're not there as teachers. They're there as co-players in the game. And I have to say, in the 8 months we've been doing this, we're just astounded with where the kids have taken their learning. far beyond where any curriculum would have taken them. And so we kind of see curriculum as a bit of a tyranny to the whole process of learning in many cases. That's certainly what we're reporting. And our kids tell us the interruption to their learning in the day is going to school and then coming home and getting back online in the game with the co-learners that they're playing with. So I certainly embrace the chaos is a really good theme to pick up on.
That's a great story, Bronwyn. I was actually curious to hear more from folks working in K-12, whether these principles that Howard's describing for what he calls motivated self-learners, what are the opportunities and challenges for trying to do it in the K-12 context? And just to pick up from a question on the live stream, which, maybe George, you might have a perspective on, is how can we help teachers shift from controlling the flow of learning to becoming an esteemed co-learner?
Yeah, I actually was going to pipe in, just kind of listening to the conversations here, because it's great to talk about, we have innovative teachers, in little pockets doing those types of things that Bronwyn was talking about with students. But in the reality, what we're trying to do at a K-12 in an entire school division is that's the norm, not the exception. So what part of my role is to work with people to kind of create that messy learning environment with educators, so that we are sometimes, starting with, talking about ideas like connected learning and what that looks like, but not having a set curriculum based on it, but letting people just kind of learn as they go and bring that and share that with one another. So I think that if you really want it to be division-wide or system-wide, you have to start with educators so that they experience that type of learning, not just start teaching it, because they have to be comfortable with that chaos and seeing what it looks like before they start implementing it. And that's how they're going to really start embracing it. And we're seeing it that as we experiment in our own professional development, more teachers are going into their classroom and doing that with their students and being comfortable with it and embracing that messiness.
Yeah, I was going to chime in too. I think what everyone said is right. What really resonated with me with what Howard said was the doing part. And when we go into schools and they're asking us to come in and help them create students as co-learners, empower students to take responsibility for their own learning by sharing something they know about digital technology with teachers, we recommend we feel it's sort of like the utopia. If you give people a simple model to do once and then let them do it. I mean, you can talk to people forever about how wonderful co-learning is and how all these things are going to change. But until they do it with their kids and their schedule and, and they see it in front of them unfolding, then they understand it. And then they come back to you at the end of the year and said, hey, guess what worked? And it's like, yep, we could have lectured you all year about that and you never would have gotten it. So I really think the doing is the most important thing. Even for kids, we always ask schools to bring students to the professional development because they should be as much a part of the mission as the teachers. And mission is crucial for kids. I mean, what kid doesn't want to change the world? So why not give them the responsibility to be part of this revolution, to be a co-learner? And you have to be explicit with kids. You have to put it in superhero language. You're part of changing the world. And there is nothing more committed than a 15-year-old on a mission. And they are the ones who are going to talk the teachers into using the technology. And they're there with the skills. So we really believe that having people walk through a simple model the first year is really crucial. And then convincing them that they don't need to stay on that same model year after year, that they can own it and create where it goes so that it works for them, their community, their kids, their teachers, everyone.
That's so interesting. Sylvia and George, do you find that from that base of experience, people are actually changing institutional practice? Or, I mean, I think it's that tension between, we're at a moment where I think a lot of people are experiencing and recognizing the power of these peer-oriented, more learner-driven kinds of agendas, but it does still feel like the entrenched practices and institutional norms have been much more challenging to shift. Um, I don't know if you can speak to that, or maybe John, too, with your work on communities of practice, what does it take to move from that transformative experience to actual shifts in practice? I'll let anybody who wants to jump in on that.
I think it is practice. I think you ask them to do something, and then it becomes clear to them. I'm a firm believer that in constructionism, that learning is constructed in your head for adults, for kids, for everyone, and that doing something good makes that happen. So we actually, we really get on our teachers, and look, it's tough for a lot of them, letting go. And that's one of the common things they say: I step back and let go. That's a very tough thing for a teacher to do, especially if they're worried that someone's going to walk in the room and think that they're not doing their job because you can't see the teaching. So these teachers face incredible odds if they're not in a supportive system like George is talking about. I think you have to work at all sides. You can't just say, we're going to teach the teachers and hope it trickles to the classroom. We're going to teach the students outside of school and hope it trickles into school. I mean, school is where kids are. That's why I'm working there. I love all this stuff that's going around all on the outside, but it's like everything has to change at once, and it's impossible and has to be done. So we'll do it.
Yeah, I agree with you, Sylvia, and I've been working on a little campaign to get teachers to think of themselves in the same way Google does its employees, and to innovate for 20%, try to change 20%, risk take for 20% of your teaching time, do something different, because, a lot of the models teachers see from their classroom is a journey too far. They can't envisage themselves doing that. So it does involve stepping them into a new practice, but they have to be prepared to do just a percentage of the change. And everyone can do that. I mean, once you step into your classroom, you can innovate for 20%. And that seems achievable. 100% change, too far away.
I want to jump in to address a couple of the questions that came up from the live stream chat very briefly. One of them is, can I talk a little bit about the influence of Illich's Deschooling Society on your thinking? Well, I'll have to say that Deschooling Society was a seed that really fell on fertile ground, because I was one of those learners who's always been hungry to learn, but for whom school was a tremendous obstacle. The regimentation, the sitting in a desk all day long, having to learn all this stuff that I knew most of it already, and wait for everybody else. And in my school, if you were trouble, you got thrown out of class, and they sent you to the art room and the library. And the art room was chaotic, and it was one of these hacker spaces. It was just not about technique, but about permission. And so that had a deep influence on me. And I think when Illich's critique is a radical one, and I don't know of a practical solution. I don't know about doing away with schools, but I do think, and it was certainly clear to me when I first faced students, that they are to a large extent constrained by the way they have learned, by the containers within which their learning was presented to them. So I've got these, to me, what's really telling is I can bet on this. I do bet on this. At the first day of class, I request a class where the chairs and the desks can be folded and put away. And so they're all in a corner, and I just stand to one side, and the students come in, and by golly, they always set up their desks in rows and columns. And if I do not otherwise intervene, the second time they do it, the next week, they'll set it up, and they'll sit in the same place that they sat the first week, and they're not even thinking about this. So that's what got me to thinking that there's a certain amount of deprogramming involved here, and that reminded me of Illich, but also led me to Postman and Weingarten's teaching as a subversive activity, and that's where they talk about the importance of asking questions, and that's what led to the collaborative inquiry. And I found that if I really asked the students, what's going on with you, and is this thing I'm trying really working, once they get it into their heads that I actually am asking that, then we can start co-creating things together. Which leads me to one of the other questions, which is, are students just curating, posting old knowledge, or reconstructing, remixing old knowledge, new ideas to create a new form of thinking? To what degree is that not the standard syllabus? You give them the tests, you give them the lectures, they're supposed to know what they're supposed to retain, you give them a test to see whether they've retained it. I'm really interested in using the texts to develop a language for talking about the subject, for creating some different frameworks and conceptual lenses for looking at the subject, and then asking people actively, so what does this have to do with us as individuals? What does it have to do with our relationships, our society? Where's this all going? So I think if you start with the old knowledge, the texts, the evidence, and begin trying to put it together in a way that makes sense for you, but then I think interrogating it. To me, that's the essence of the kind of learning that I'm involved in. You know, I'm sure that if you're going to learn brain surgery or how to build a bridge that doesn't fall down, there are certain things that you need to learn in that old kind of banking model way, and you need to know it the way everybody else knows it. I don't think that that encompasses all of learning, and I think that trying to fit that into all of learning is kind of deadening to people's natural hunger for learning. So I'll turn this over to anybody else who wants to jump in.
So, Howard, sort of on this point of, how much is it about creating new models versus transmitting existing knowledge. I've been struck just observing your experimentation in this space with how there's sort of this balance between what you were describing as that more chaotic and emergent dimension of how your processes are organized and the very kind of structured and intentional sorts of activities that you have. And because I tend to study learning that's not sequestered at all, that doesn't have a classroom frame around it, it really feels like what you're trying to do is something in between a more sequestered learning frame and a much more organic, completely emergent kind of frame, and that there's tremendous value in those sort of hybrid spaces of translation, because when I see kids just on their own learning and doing very demand-driven learning, it's incredible what they do, but then there's also sort of this moment where they encounter something difficult, or a bit of structure and guidance could be very productive. And I think kind of working at that interface, like I'm struck with how you describe it as very chaotic, but at the same time, like finding those tools, those kinds of activities that actually frame and channel the bottom-up content generation is incredibly important. And so it does feel like even with very high functioning kind of online interest groups and things, the groups that have become very successful in becoming learning communities and not just sort of, chaotic social media sharey communities are ones that have developed similar structures.
Well, one thing that I've discovered is that people do look to me for facilitation and leadership and guidance, even if we all accept and sign up for this co-learning business. For one thing, the universe is very large. The nice thing that a teacher or facilitator can do is this is the size of our universe. These are where the boundaries are, and we're going to concentrate within that. That helps people. There's a certain vertigo involved in self-learning, and I think it helps people escape from that. But also, I do teach things, or I facilitate learning around subjects that I am enthusiastic about and that I have learned on my own for a great deal of time. So I think I teach a course on Introduction to Cooperation Studies. I think you have to understand what people have been doing in biology around symbiosis and ecosystems. You need to understand what social psychologists have been doing around social dilemmas and where game theory came from and what some of the evolutionary debates about where cooperation may have come from. You need to know about Elinor Ostrom and Institutions for Collective Action. In any field, there are people and ideas that are fundamental. So I think you need to introduce those things. But as I said, I introduce them so that we can have a vocabulary and a set of lenses and a set of frameworks for thinking about this. And then the missions are things that they're kind of focal lenses that I give people to try to focus what they've learned and to practice with it. And then to go beyond that, I always encourage people to self-organize collaborative probes, to do projects that don't pretend to be legitimate, well well-regulated research that you would submit to a peer-reviewed journal, but a kind of probe of something. Try to discover some new knowledge. Try to use the concepts, the vocabulary, the conceptual frameworks to go tackle a question that you think is interesting to you, and then to come back and report that to others. So I think that there's always a kind of breathing out, breathing in. There's always a rhythm to it. I learned very early from someone named Lisa Kimball that in online discussion there are containers and tempos, and so I introduce them to the forum, the blog, the wiki. I tell them what those containers are for, what we can do in those spaces, and I introduce them to the tempos, what we do in a live session, and we continue that in the online discussions and in the blogs and the blog comments. Once I give people the containers and the tempos, and I point them to the texts, then the making sense of it, I think you need to do your homework. You need to do the readings. You need to look at the videos. You need to do the exercises. But then we come together with the assumption that we've all done that and try to push it. Try to ask, what does this mean? Try to challenge it. When you talk about cooperation theory, people always object to this old notion of homo economicus, the rational self-interested actor, and they hate game theory, the idea that you can really quantify the way people deal with dilemmas. A lot of this game theory is based on a huge amount of empirical evidence, but we're also seeing a lot of challenges to this rational self-interested actor. So we're really on the edge of knowledge with that. Now, I think if you're talking about something like plane geometry, there really is no edge of knowledge. It's been known since Euclid. So a lot of it depends on your subject matter, and I choose subject matter that has that kind of fuzzy boundary. We're at the edge of what people know. And so maybe there's a limit to self-learning. I'm not offering this as a panacea. I'm exploring the space.
Interesting example of, elementary mathematics, Howard. I recently read Jean Lave's latest book on critical ethnographic practice. And one of the kind of amazing things there is a little community of tailors in West Africa that she portrays had coexisting 3 or 4 different number systems, different bases, different ways of making calculations. And it seemed to me that one of the impressive things about that community was that it could hold those different ways of thinking and not be fazed by it. And it seems to me that raises this question about the communities that you are essentially convening. Will they be able to hold different truths that really go in different directions? And is that a worthy goal, or is that really a freaky, scary outcome?
Well, for me, I think one of the presets that comes along with this is that the people who are interested in what I'm putting out there are fairly different kinds of people from different parts of the world. So it's not unusual to have somebody very active in Belgium and somebody very active in Brazil and Argentina in the class, and I've learned a lot from those, that there are cultural contexts around a lot of many of the common words and ideas that we have, beginning with this idea of peer learning, coming from Freire's work, who are we? Where there's a big assumption when you say we. And so when you've got a group of people who come from different walks of life, different parts of the world, and we are going to learn together, one of the things we need to start doing is talking about, well, what do we mean by we? So yes, we're going to try to flatten the hierarchy here, and Howard is the facilitator, but he is explicitly giving us empowering us to step forward and to push back on what he says and to question things. But are we really, are there hidden hierarchies here? So I think that's always a good question to ask. And of course, Farah was about, this is a really important lens. If you're not questioning the very bases of the society within which your learning and your institution is based, then you're sort of fooling yourself. So we don't get deeply into that kind of analysis, but I think it's important to be aware that we've got assumptions about who peers are. And, you know, some of our people have advanced degrees and have taught for many years. Some of them are graduate students. One of my most active learners is a retired fellow who was in the hospitality industry his whole life, but he knows a lot. He's a very motivated learner. He teaches other people how to be self-learners. So I think we need to, if you explicitly tell people that we've got assumptions, we can't do away with them, but we should surface them, become aware of them, and challenge them, then that makes for a really interesting situation. Again, if the people come from a more homogeneous background, then that question of who are we and where are we in the hierarchy? I mean, are you at the top or are you at the bottom? And, you know, if you're at the top, what are your privileges? And if you're at the bottom, what are you going to do about it? Those are, I think, important questions in peer learning, and maybe it will become built into, that's one of the reasons around the handbook, is to not give people a step-by-step recipe, but to give them a whole group of tools and enable people to be aware of the things that you could be aware of when you're doing self-organized self-learning.
You know, I think my point was to suggest that the structure of the conversation of the community has an implication for the domain content, and that, you know, we kind of look forward at that. I don't want to dominate with the conversation with that issue, but it seems to me that kind of hidden in what you're doing is something that disrupts the idea of you know, codified, closed form knowledge, which I think is great, but I think it's really threatening to you know, a lot of notions of you know, like best practice.
Well, I don't advocate that people teach brain surgery this way, and I don't think that it's something that's applicable to everything. But, you know, I think, back to Illich, to the degree that schooling has deadened our hunger and our thirst for learning, which is natural for humans, then learning something, you know, whether it's Minecraft or Introduction to Cooperation Theory, in an exciting way, reawakens that, and it sort of feeds the well springs of energy that you need to apply to the kind of teaching and learning that sometimes is, you got to learn things by rote, you got to sit there and listen to lectures, you got to struggle through textbooks. I don't think you can entirely do away with that, but I don't think that that's the entirety of the world, and that seeing learning as the entirety of what we're confronted with in the education system is kind of darkens people's view of it and closes their horizons.
Howard,
Howard,
oh, go ahead, Bronwyn.
I was just going to quickly jump in and say what we're finding with kids is that when they experience this chaotic, messy, fantastic learning, they start demanding more of their school. They start demanding bringing that learning into the school and start asking their teachers, why aren't we using these tools in our school? And so the kids start putting pressure on the school to change as well.
Yeah, I was going to say too, you know, one of my mentors, Seymour Papert, called it kid power and said it was one of the levers that was going to change learning, is the kids seeing that they could do things different ways and demanding that that happen. I think social media is one of the forces that's going to make that happen. But I also wanted to say that I think a lot of people look at these kinds of unorganized learning communities and devalue the role of a formal teaching experience and the teacher. I think the teacher can be incredibly important. I mean, especially in K-12, when you have compulsory attendance and a teacher in the room, and that form goes unquestioned. That teacher can be crucial in kind of not forcing and not being the commander of every second in the classroom, but tilting the landscape towards big ideas. And that's an incredibly difficult skill to master. It looks easy. It looks like you're doing nothing, but just like Howard's classes, somehow magically all these things happen. Well, that's because of his expertise in being the puppet master without actually telling and touching and forcing. That's an incredibly difficult skill to master. It takes a good teacher to look like they're not doing anything at all, and all this wonderful, joyful noise is happening. So, I never devalue the role of the teacher in the classroom, the formal learning expert in a classroom, especially for kids who have to be there.
Thanks, Sylvia. I just wanted to note that we are getting near the end of our hour, and I wanted to invite our guests on the Hangout if they have any last words, and then we'll give Howard the closing comment.
My comment would be that inventing new devices that mediate between the chaos and the order is very important, and those devices can be technical media devices. They can be structured missions. They can be different sense of identity that the leader offers or that students come up with. But learning about that is actually new knowledge, and then the question comes up of how to spread that.
Yeah, I would say that I think one of the things Howard touched on very early on was this sort of cycle of learning, responsibility and trust lead to engagement, and back to getting more responsibility. You have to empower the students, and to have empowered students, you have to empower the teachers. Everyone has to be empowered in the system. Otherwise, nothing works. And engagement it's not a goal, it's an outcome of giving kids powerful, meaningful work, meaningful to them. And the same thing for teachers. Everyone needs to be trusted and be responsible for something important. And out of that comes engagement.
I love the phrase Sylvia used, tilting the landscape towards big ideas. And I think I'm going to take that away with me and chew on that some more, because I really think that was powerful.
And if I could just say, when we're doing these things with our educators, with our students, especially with our educators, there has to be that balance between pressure and support, that we're there to work with people and to help them out. But we are pushing them because ultimately we're trying to do what's best for kids all the time. And if we embrace this and see, if we know these opportunities that are out there, but we have to be able to support our educators in where they are at their learning, make sure it's differentiated, just like we do with our kids.
Great. Thank you, everybody who joined us for the Hangout. It was a great group. Howard, do you want to make the closing word here?
Well, I just want to invite anybody who wants to participate in this to do so. It's entirely about self-election. If there's a little something you want to contribute, then you are certainly welcome to listen in on it. And you can go to socialmediaclassroom.com/host/pedagogy, or you can just Google the word pedagogy, P-E-R-A-G-O-G-Y, and you will see that there's Pedagogy Social Media Classroom will lead you to the wiki, and the wiki will give you instructions. And if you just want me to sign you up, email me, howard@rheingold.com.
Fantastic. Thanks, everybody. And I encourage you to join us for our next session next week, which will be with mentor Mike Hawkins, who works at the U Media Center in the Harold Washington Library in Chicago.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, y'all.